Hello, this is Jinesh Jain, and today I'm going to talk about the schema theory and perception. Hold your horses. It may sound excruciatingly boring and so forth, but believe me, it's not. See, the schema theory explains the pattern in which our brain organizes categories of information and the relationship between these packets. Kind of like a library where every book has a spot and there's a connection between all the sections. These things tend to organize the knowledge that we have, assist recall of the same, guide our behavior, and predict likely happenings. It helps us make sense and understand surroundings. To be put in a nutshell, this theory can explain how memory works, how it can get distorted, and much more. If you look at it, the theory is the basic explanation for bias. So people aren't judgmental, they just have messed up brains. Jean Piaget was the first one to propose this, but not directly. He focused on children and how they acquire pattern of storing and thinking. So basically he experimented on children to get his results. The man who actually proposed this theory was psychologist Frederick Bartlett. He asked a participant to read a story and write it again, and then asked another to read the story written by the last participant and write it again. He repeated this 6 times over. So he basically played a fancy version of Chinese whispers and called himself a psychologist. He came to the conclusion that memory is not accurate and pre-existing thoughts renovate memories. How schema works is a stimulus evokes a particular schema and the person reacts to what the said packet of information holds. Now, for example, a man on television yelling "Mitron" strikes terror in hearts of people because God knows what policy is about to come next. Stimuli can be textual, visual, or any other senses. It generally takes more than one of them to activate a schemata. A schemata is a slot that can be filled or empty, and they contain typical relationships only. A good example of activation would be when T-Body's party says that India is a Hindu nation. I call them morons. That's the schemata that gets activated for me. If no schemata can be found, a new one is created. So for an individual to react to anything, the internal and external schemata should be reconciled as one. Put in a nutshell, imagine each schema as a digital code, say 6 numbers. When 2 or 3 numbers are correct, we'll assume the rest of them to be correct and activate the schemata based on experience. These things influence people's perception on a day-to-day basis. Both schema and perception splits data into packets and then reorganizes them and calls them again when required based on our past, values, existing data, culture, belief, etc. In the end, the perception becomes a habit.
For example, when someone chases me with a slipper in their hand, I perceive that I should run. And eventually, if anyone does so, it becomes a habit to put some physical distance between me and said individual. Also, if you try to encourage T-Body not to bring religion into politics, he has probably zoned out the moment you uttered the first word.
Senses are transducers from the physical world to the realm of the mind. These senses interact with our goals, history, and environment, shaping our experience and motivating our behavior. Sometimes the brain alters the data sent to it by the senses to fit in the schema or the person's perception. A more fun example would be, if you see Mr. T-Body doing namaz, you'll probably think that your eyes have been deceived regardless of what the truth is. 3 important things that come with schema theory are assimilation, accommodation, and equilibrium. When we take in new information into our previously existing schemata, it is assimilation. Sometimes to do so, we can alter the facts and leave out some of them, because not all data can be assimilated, as some of it might not fit into the schema that has been evoked. Thus, it is ignored or altered to fit. The second one, that is accommodation, is basically creation of new schema when new data comes to light. Example, when you point out that demonetization has been a cause for death for many people, a supporter of the policy would create a new schema that for something good to happen, some people may have to suffer, as long as they are not those people. The thing with these two things is that they go hand in hand, but one is always dominant. Equilibrium is a bit more complicated than the other two. This is when the person truthfully represents what is, and the what is actually fits into the schema. It goes on till the individual cannot assimilate or accommodate any further than what they have. When it is lost, the person tends to alter their behavior to achieve it. The process of reaching it and losing it and reaching it again is the actual development of the brain. So basically, the subject uses assimilation and accommodation to reach equilibrium, which in turn leads to cognitive development. There are many kinds of schema theories, but one theory that I believe deserves special mention is the cultural schema theory. It says that humans classify people from other cultures. It also holds that some schema are shared by entire cultural groups. For example, when people in India categorize Indians from the seven sister states as Chinese, they are basing it on their schema and experience that people with those features are supposed to be Chinese. So to conclude, the schema theory and perceptions are two intertwined topics, and the schema theory has its own demerits as it is too abstract to fully be understood. But nonetheless, it has played a very significant role in the field of psychology. Sorry for the bombardment of information, and goodbye.